If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Buy Sam a drink and get his dog 1-2. Echoing through the city of Pittsburgh tonight, I know that we are a Pirates podcast, but for anybody that is a Pittsburgh sports fan, grew up in the Pittsburgh area, there are voices of our youth, of our childhood, early adulthood that kind of really stick with you. On the Pirates end, Lanny Terry, Steve Blass, the Steelers end, Myron Cope, Bill Hillgrove. And for the Penguins, it was always Mike Lange, Michael Motorcycle. There's Lookout Loretta. There is so many liners. We talked about, like, if there's like movies, we talked about Bob Uecker not too long ago, where these sayings just kind of come up in regular conversation. These are some of these, and it's a very sad night for a lot of Pittsburgh sports fans out there. We are going to talk Pirates, but Scott, how you doing today, brother?
Well, I don't always know what to do, whether to cry or wind my watch, but today is a day to cry. And let's not forget that Mike Lange was a Pirates announcer for a while. And so that classic skit that he and Steve Blass did, they became very close friends. So our hearts go out to everyone connected to Mike Lange and all of his fans, which seem to be all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I mean, everybody has a Mike Lange story, and I have one as well. And it's one that kind of popped into my head this afternoon as I was thinking about this. And it was that for some reason, I went to a bar when I was 22, 23 years old in Freeport, Pennsylvania, and didn't even know that Mike Lange was going to be a guest bartender for the night. And that man poured me the strongest 7-7 I may have ever had in my life. It was a lot of Seagram 7, and he just basically tapped the 7-Up and like the thing. So I don't know if he was nervous, what was going on, but handed me a keychain. We had a laugh because I basically told him, I said, I didn't tell you to get me drunk on my first drink. But just one of those announcers and stuff for our generation. And just, when you hear the calls of the Penguins Stanley Cups, the types of players that the Penguins have had, from Lemieux and Yager to Malkin and Sidney, he had a catchphrase or a call for every single one of those. And unfortunately, for Pirates and for Penguins fans and for everybody out there, Elvis has left the building, and it's definitely a sad one. And I know that there's going to be a lot of tributes out there. So, go listen to some old Mike Lange calls, read all of the articles about him, the stories. I saw one on Facebook how he would travel sometimes with the chip chop ham to fans that he had met on the road to deliver that to them. I'm guessing like packed in some dry ice or something. So, I mean, definitely going to be missed. And I'm pretty sure the Pirates at some point in time during this year will give him a due tribute.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of great videos out there on social media with all of his great calls, and he'll certainly be missed, but he'll stick with us forever. As somebody, as I mentioned on Twitter, when I first discovered hockey, first became a hockey fan regularly, really got hooked by it. I would sit down every night and do my math homework and put on Fox Sports Pittsburgh, which most of the time was during the winter was a hockey game, and so yeah, the voice of childhood, young adulthood, stick with you forever. And let's we not forget that Scott Sauerbeck also passed away, a Pirates relief pitcher from the early 2000s. That was, part of that bullpen. I looking at the notes, he was with the team 4 or 5 years. It seemed like a lot longer than that from when I was younger, but holds the Pirates record for most appearances by a left-handed pitcher in a season. But yeah, so rest in peace to both those guys.
Yeah, that one was a tough one. I saw, I think it was John Parado kind of X that out or tweeted that out, I guess would be, I don't know what the term is now, but yeah, I mean, that was the time. I mean, pretty much 1997 when I was a senior in high school, and then graduated in 2001 and started going to a lot more Pirates games. I mean, during that time, you have pretty much free money if you work at all, living at home and stuff. Took in a ton of Pirates games, so yeah, Scott Sauerbeck was one of those guys that, I mean, and had a very good career for a guy that the Pirates, kind of like picked in the Rule 5 draft. We always talk about the Rule 5 draft, not really meaning a lot. And at times it doesn't, but, a team that, really, unfortunately at that point in time, wasn't trying to compete for the most part, was able to pick him up and get a lot of, good innings out of that arm, and stuck around for a few more years after that, and made a major league career for himself, settled in Bradenton, spring training home of the Pittsburgh Pirates. So yeah, that's definitely, when you hear like stuff like that, it's like, okay, uh, can we talk about something, a little bit more exciting, just because, those are things that kind of bring you down a little bit. But I mean, tying it in there, Bradenton, home of spring training, there is spring training activity still going on at this point. The last time we talked, it was just only pitchers and catchers reporting. Now we have full squad workouts. We're seeing the live at bats. Uh, I feel bad for anybody who their first at bat. I mean, Adam Frazier kind of fell on the sword for all of the Pirates hitters there. His first at bat as a Pirate back is against Paul Skeens, and is just made to look silly. I saw Skeens interviewed after that, and he said, "Yeah, I was kind of missing with my pitches a little bit." And I'm like, "Dude, if you're missing with your pitches, I mean, I'm going to be excited even more to see you hit with your pitches." But yeah, there's some stuff to talk about. Obviously, a Pirates having a signing today, but Scott, with the stuff you've been seeing, or just some general observations about spring training before we get into what may be the Pirates' last main move before they make it to opening day. What have you been seeing just in some of the videos, some of the articles you've been reading about spring training?
Well, I mean, it's the cliche of everybody's coming in the best shape of their life. So, but in a lot of what I've heard, Key Brian Hayes looks like he's happy, seems to be as healthy as one can expect. As we've talked about, that back is just going to be something that is going to have to be managed for the rest of his career. So all he can do to maximize his potential is to put himself in a good position where he can manage that and get on the field as much as he possibly can. And from all accounts, he seems to be, at least as it starts, in a position to do that. I heard that David Bednar is kind of trimmed down a little bit, maybe put on some muscle. He's looked sharp so far. That's going to be a big piece to this team. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But we all know that the bullpen is, a must for this team to improve. Some things like young guys that I've seen that I really like. Connor Griffith really stood out with some of the bombs that he's hit. Just that swing. Back to Key Brian Hayes, the two-handed swing. I saw some video of that recently, and if he can minimize the torque on his back for those, it always felt last year with Hayes that if it was something was outside and he swung through it, he was swinging out of his shoes and doing this weird like turn and one-handed follow through, and it looked like he was going to fall over. because he was doing that. I can't imagine that was good for his back, or maybe it was because his back was hurting that things like that were happening. So if he can two-handed swing, two-handed follow through, and not control that a little bit more, that's something that I've heard a little bit of. Everything's sounding good, and I mean, players are doing their PR. They're talking to the reporters, saying the right things. Tommy Pham had a great interaction with reporters because I think my concern with him is that attitude that we've seen in the past. You know, can he be a bit prickly? Can he be a bit abrasive? Does he not always get along best with teammates? But he's saying the right things. And hey, maybe the good guy attitude that this team has had for the last handful of years, maybe it's time to add a little bit of attitude to it, get a little nasty, get a little tough.
Yeah, and the other thing that I kind of noticed, there was already some video. I think I reposted it. It was from Kevin Gorman, where Spencer Horwitz was out there taking some grounders, obviously just into the glove, into the bucket, nothing like that. Hearing stuff about him taking some left-handed swings. I know that the surgery was on the right hand, and that his probably his follow-through hand, but at least getting some baseball action in there. I know that when the injury was announced, the surgery was announced, people were wondering how quick would that return be to baseball activities, and obviously it's only a couple of weeks here following the surgery, so that answers that question. Ben Cherington, I know, talked to reporters, had a little bit of a media day out there, and said that no, that 6 to 8 weeks was like return to like gameplay. That wasn't return to baseball action. Obviously, there are still steps that need to be taken for him to achieve that, but I mean, there are these guidelines and timelines. And one thing that we talked about at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, Scott, that is kind of coming to fruition when we're talking about until we see this guy on the mound, until we see the progression, the steps he's going to take, what timelines are going to look like. And to me, that's Johan Oviedo, because prior to spring training, there was a lot of stuff out there that we had talked about hearing that, fifth man in the rotation, or at least fifth pitcher in the rotation, not giving him a number. I heard other people saying, no innings limits. Heard at least one Pirates beat reporter say, start him out strong and then end him in the bullpen. And this whole time, we've just basically been saying, okay, let's see him on the mound. We did see that. And then let's hear, what the plan and everything is going to be for him. And it definitely seems to be a slow play, which is something that Derek Shelton had been talking about since, October, November, December, is that, he is allowed to throw his bullpens. There is not, any restrictions on the type of pitches that he could throw, but he's not a guy that is getting live at bats yet. We're not sure when we're going to see him in game action. So, yeah, that fifth rotation spot out of the 5 pitchers, whether it's, probably in most people's minds, him or Bailey Falter in the 4 or the 5. I mean, prior to tonight, when we're recording on Thursday, that was really up for grabs. But yeah, I mean, until you see these guys actually start working their way back in, to think a guy coming back from Tommy John, I mean, we laid out the numbers last week that they're not good for guys to throw full seasons or throw a ton of innings in a season returning from Tommy John, is kind of coming to fruition.
Yeah, the Pirates signing Andrew Heaney to a 1-year, $5.25 million deal to presumably be in the rotation. And I think that goes into what we talked about with Oviedo and the best way to play him. Heaney could be or Falter, whoever ends up being, somebody's going to be an odd man out. And I guess the assumption would be him. But you use him as a placeholder for the beginning of the year, in my mind. And then when the trade deadline comes, maybe getting close to the trade deadline, because I think I would not be surprised if the corresponding move for this signing is to put Oviedo on the 60-day, just to get him that slow play, like we're talking about, a rehab star, work his way in. That opens up a roster spot instead of doing what we have been saying is start him at AAA and kind of ease him in. So you start him on the 60-day, and then as that ends and he's ready to come up to the major leagues, you start him in the bullpen, you stretch him out a little bit. The trade deadline comes, you move one of your starting pitchers, maybe two if you want to move Fault, or I don't know what exactly you want to do there, because you're going to presumably also have Bubba Chandler ready to step in. So I think that you see Oviedo in the rotation by the end of the year, as we discussed last week. But this is a way to have somebody who can eat innings and be a reliable starter. He pitched 32 games last year for Texas and 160 innings. So you have somebody that's just going to take the mound, take the ball, and be there for you, and then buy you some time for a guy that is part of your long-term plan, and get him ready to go.
Yeah, and I told you beforehand, and everybody knows this about me, the first stat I look at is the WHIP, the walk and hits per innings pitch, especially for, a back of the rotation arm, to see if he would kind of fit into that. Usually a starter, if you're going to be a starter in the major leagues, your walks and hits per innings pitch sits below 1.300 or right around there. Last year, a 1.250. The year before that, a little bit higher, a 1.378. For his career, a 1.265. Really hasn't had too much trouble keeping himself as what I would consider a major league starting pitcher. And, a lot of other teams have as well. I mean, the Rangers signed him for 2 years, and I believe it ended up being around $25 million. Prior to that, the Dodgers had signed him for 1 year, like $8.75 million. So this is a major league arm, and this was nothing against Chandler. This is nothing in my mind against, Oviedo. It's just the reality of the situation. I know that there's Pirates fans out there, and I already saw it out there on X because I was kind of like thumbing through some stuff, after the signing before we hopped on here. And people were saying, well, what about Mike Burrows? And I'm like, well, Mike Burrows pitched 51 innings last year and has been injured throughout his minor league career. They'll say, what about Braxton Ashcraft? And I'm like, well, Braxton Ashcraft, yeah, he might have thrown like 70-some innings last year, but did not throw that many innings after the start of July. I think he had 2 quote-unquote starts and like 4 or 5 innings. I mean, there wasn't much work being done there. Bubba Chandler, as we had talked about before, it would be asking a lot of him to follow the Jared Jones path and to be healthy and to be stretched out and to be ready for a full season of Major League Baseball. You have both Chandler and Harrington, 2 guys, and Harrington, I think I've even been quoted as saying, I think he's Major League ready right now as far as his pitches go, and I believe Bubba could be as well. But then you also have to look at, 2 guys that were around like 120 some innings last year. I think Harrington might have been a hair below that. And you're thinking, okay, we were having the same discussion last spring training. If Jones makes the major league rotation, he may get up to about 150 innings, 160 if you're pushing it. But more than likely, lower than that. So there may be a slowdown, a shutdown, a buildup, wherever it may be. And you even see a player like Paul Skeens last year, kind of getting that buildup to be able to make it through, a full major league season. For a lot of these guys, and everybody I just mentioned, it would be their first full major league season. And Mike Burrows had a cup of coffee. So you throw in an Andrew Heaney, a professional major league pitcher. And yeah, the stuff's out there. Quintana, I guess the Pirates offered him, 1 year, 5.5. He declined. There's still some offers out there. The, Pirates decided to pivot and go with Heaney. If I had to choose, I would maybe go Quintana just because the Pirates are familiar with him, had better numbers last year. But the previous season in 2023 only made 13 starts with the Mets because he kind of came in, got a little bit nicked up. And, so I think there's positives and negatives to both of those. But anyway, I thought they were going to get a pitcher. I've been calling for a pitcher. I can't complain about that pitcher. It was the same thing with Adam Frazier. I called for a backup middle infielder. They give it to me. I called for an outfielder. Yeah, Tommy Phannon's not my first choice, but we got it. And then Andrew Heaney, I always thought they needed another starting pitcher, and they got one.
And it's Major League Baseball. The rotations don't stay intact all year long. Guys are going to get hurt. Maybe a guy gets sent down and maybe somebody doesn't perform. The guys that we're talking about that are going to start the season in AAA, they're going to get their time. Burrows might be a bullpen candidate. Like, you just don't know, if Ashcraft is going to be ready. These guys are going to get time, is my point. You're going to see Harrington. You're going to see Ashcraft. You're going to see Bubba. They'll have their time. But also, this is not Paul Skeens. This is not that generational talent that you cannot deny the major leagues. They ran out of excuses to keep Paul Skeens in the minor leagues. These are guys that are your more traditional top prospect starting pitchers that they can manipulate the service time. They can keep them down there. They can buy the extra year at the end of their time. It's business as usual now that Paul Skeens is in the major league.
Yeah, and the one thing I was looking at, even with, if you would not have added an arm, you had, a Jared Jones who got injured during the middle of the season and came back and didn't pitch that well. That's something that I don't think that Pirates fans forget it. I think that maybe after that 10-game losing streak right after the trade deadline, that maybe some people started to check out a little bit. But yeah, did not pitch well. Bailey Falter, who pitched horribly in spring training, had a terrible first inning in his first start of the season, came back down to earth and didn't pitch that great. Mitch Keller, didn't pitch that great. I was looking at this earlier because we we were wondering what exactly we were going to talk about. Through the end of July, the Pirates were in the top 5, according to ERA, in all of Major League Baseball. And then in the last 2 months of the season, even with Paul Skeens doing what he was doing, Luis Ortiz, who is no longer here, was still pitching well at times, but they were a bottom 5. They went from I think it was like a 3.46 ERA to like a 5.06 ERA for those last 2 months. So, I mean, getting a pitcher in here who can kind of buffer that stuff at the beginning of the season to hopefully keep guys healthier, keep guys, healthy towards the end of the season, because, I mean, in the end, that is the goal. You talk about, how I know on MLB Network last season during June, it would be like, would you want to face, Paul Skeens and Mitch Keller and Jared Jones? And I know I said on this thing, I'm like, well, it's June. Like, you don't know what you're going to be facing in September. And if the Pirates make the playoffs, you're facing Paul Skeens and 3 pitchers who were, unfortunately, they were limping themselves, kind of towards the end of the season. So, yeah, you want to have that health. Hopefully you can get through with a good record, just kind of like we talked about last week is, can we get to the point where, yeah, we're still clinging around 500. We are still within a couple games of the wild card at the trade deadline, maybe make an acquisition to push that forward, or have guys that are rested and aren't, worn out and getting to the end of the season. Because, yeah, once you get to the end of September, October, I mean, it is February 20th, and we're asking these guys to still be pitching at the top of their game on September 20th. I mean, that's a lot of time from now. So, yeah, I mean, this is a good ad. I don't think there's anybody that's going to disparage this. I just think that I don't think that people thought this was necessary. I think we always thought it was.
Yeah, you can't have enough arms. We're seeing that bullpen rotation. You have to load up on the arms because they get hurt or they turn the wrong direction. We saw that with Bednar last year. We saw that with several guys in the bullpen last year. It just takes one tweak, one injury that can throw off your mechanics for a good chunk. This is a conversation that I had at work with some people, a customer, and some people I work with, and a lot of people are poo pooing the Pirates off season, saying that they didn't do enough. Which I think everybody can agree that they probably didn't do it enough. But going into the season, they they have the same or slightly better team, even offensively, than they had last year. You have Tommy Pham in a corner outfield position. He has to be better than the black hole that they had last year in right field, but now it'll be left field. And then Spencer Horwitz and whoever platoons with him at first base has to provide more than Rowdy did. You would think. I mean, I guess we'll assume. And so if you maintain the same offensive production that you had last year, or improve a little bit, and you can just shore up some of those games in from the bullpen, we're looking at a whole different season. We're looking at a team that can compete. And I know that everybody wants to say same old Pirates, and that's the feeling you get when you go on social media. Same old Pirates, just not spending enough, not going and making a splash move. But really, I mean, if the offense comes in and does what they did last year, and you save some of those games that you let go towards the end of last season, and you do that by having more options in the bullpen, guys signed to minor league deals that you can then bring up if somebody gets hurt. You have the reserves because they ran out of arms, really. And a lot of the guys in the bullpen fell apart at the same time. Bednar was never anything last season for the most part. Chapman went through rough patches. Holderman went through his issues. It just happened over and over again and all at the same time. So by stocking up on these arms, like we're talking about, both in the rotation and in the bullpen, if they were in positions offensively where they had leads, how many times they got the lead, and we're watching these games and we're thinking, well, how long is this going to last? Oh, it's just a couple innings and the bullpen's going to give this up. If you lock down some of those games, that makes a big difference to where they end up in the standings. And I think that there's more optimism for this season than you're finding on social media.
Yeah, and the other part with me is kind of like while you're talking there, Scott, is I'm thinking about, kind of how Ben Cherington talked about how he was going to build this team and how much of the improvement was going to have to come from within. And, I titled this, and it's probably not what's going to go out because we title things ahead of time and then it might change, was kind of hoping and praying for, Pirates player improvement. But I mean, that's realistically where a lot of this is coming from. Can Nick Gonzalez take a step forward? Can Jack Sawinski at least be, the player he was in 2023 or something comparable to that to get on the field and to maybe be a platoon with Tommy Pham at some point in time? Do the Pirates, the other part is I just keep thinking of is, do the Pirates make a move like we talked about last week of, getting to a point at the trade deadline where you're going a little bit more in and you have a little bit more wiggle room to spend and to bring in a player and to add payroll as opposed to, kind of staying status quo with payroll throughout the trade deadline. So that's where like a lot of this is coming. Can Brian come back and be healthy? Can Ono Cruz take a step forward in his first full healthy season in the major leagues? Can that type of stuff happen for them? And then also, like I said, people question, like that's where it gets to me is like the question, like, can Nick Gonzalez take a step forward? And I'm like, can Jared Jones take a step forward? That's the other piece is that can he be probably not as lights out as he was during the first couple months of the season? I mean, I looked back at his whip. It was under 1 for the first month. It was just over 1. I mean, we're talking like reliever numbers as far as that goes. Usually elite relievers are right around 1.00 on their walks and hits per innings pitch, and that's where Jared Jones was at. And there was no way. I mean, I don't think there's any way he was going to keep that up, but can he be something in between, what he was towards the end of the season? And I know that they're saying out there he's added another pitch. He did have, I think, 4 pitches that he used, or at least 3 last year. There was a fastball, a slider, threw a curveball and a changeup a little bit, but can he kind of become more of a pitcher? Because I mean, Jared Jones blew us away last year with being a thrower is what he was. And man, he was a great thrower. Like, he was blowing stuff past guys. But I mean, I think that even a player like Paul Skeens realizes, and he may end up with as many pitches as Yu Darvish at some point in time, who I think throws 10 to 13 pitches. But it's like basically saying, like, there is like a way to evolve, and you have to pitch. Once you get to this level, like, you have these guys and they're all professional hitters, and something's going to have to happen. So with Jones, adding that extra pitch or 2 would be great. Just to be able to preserve that arm a little bit, because I know, Scott, you and I have talked about it. Like, watching Skeens pitch, it looks effortless. Watching Jones pitch, it looks like he's putting every single ounce of energy he has into every single pitch, and that doesn't last for a full season, 6 and 7 innings every time. You have to kind of, maybe at some point in time, for those guys, you have to swallow your pride a little bit. You got to throw a sinker to get a ground ball. You got to, catch a guy off guard and throw an off-speed pitch and get some weak contact. I mean, that's the type of stuff that kind of has to happen, because, yeah, the strikeouts are sexy. They are awesome. They are great. They're the things that, Pitching Ninja will put up there. Yeah. But the pitches that, keep your career going are the, let's get off of here. Instead of throwing 20 pitches this inning, let me throw 15.
Yeah, because for every strikeout, that's at least 3 pitches. And we all like the strikeout, but there are times where the bullpen is taxed and you need the starter to go deep. And hey, if I can just induce a ground ball to the shortstop on the first pitch of the at bat, that's the way to go. And by adding, a sinker or a 2-seam, something like that, you need to have your go-to pitch to get your ground ball double play. So, yeah, the more that they can add to their arsenal that they can deploy in the pitching way, instead of just going over there and trying to overpower every time. And that's something that Jones, he would start getting comfortable, start feeling that fastball, and then they would time it up and he would start give up those home runs. And so, yeah, let's see that growth. Let's see. We have these players that broke out, had quote unquote breakouts last year, Jones for sure, and Nick Gonzalez to a lesser degree, but, he made an impression. Can he maintain that breakout? And who's going to be the breakout player for this season? We saw that Nick York got a first baseman's glove from his brother. So is he going to see time? Is Triolo going to play at first base? We've already heard definitively. We heard at the very beginning of spring training, and I think it's been re-reported in the last few days, that Brian Reynolds does not expect to see any time at first base as far as the plan goes now. Ben Cherington said Endy is not going to see time at first base. He's a catcher. So there's some options. What's Henry going to do? Is Henry going to break out? He's done some things with his swing. Instead of trying to pull everything, he's trying to hit more in the middle or go the other way with the pitches. So who's going to be that next breakout? As we hope that these guys that broke out last year sustain.
Yeah, and for people that are watching stuff on social media, please do not overreact when Adam Frazier is out there taking grounders at first base. Yes, he did play a little bit of first base last year, but you have to be somebody who's down at Pirate City, and there are drills going on, and they just have everybody line up, and they just basically say, take this. And will you see Adam Frazier at first base for a game? I'm not going to put it out of the realm of possibilities. I just don't see him maybe being the answer, and he could be the answer to maybe fill in while Spencer Horwitz is, maybe rehabbing for the first couple weeks or so. But it's not that long-term solution. People are kind of losing their minds about those kind of things. And as a player for Nick York, he is a kid who wants to be in the major leagues and is still very young. And if they just basically told me, if you got some reps at first base, there may be a shot for you to break camp with the major league team, dude, I'm calling my brother up and saying, overnight that thing and get it here. It's not saying that he is the solution at first base. It's saying that he is a guy who is on the cusp of the roster. And if he does have that versatility, because hopefully you have your guys lined up at each position. I mean, you could go through them. You go Ke'Bryan, IKF, then you go over to Nick, and then Horwitz and whoever it may be for the majority of the season. You're going to have to find your spots in there. Yep. You're going to have to out-hit them. You're going to have to outplay them. You're going to have to maybe come in as a utility guy during your first year and then work yourself into a position. So, yeah, I mean, to me, that's not anything that it's like we're looking for something or we're trying to be cheap to try to, find another cheap option for first base. Go out and get somebody to replace Horwitz because he's injured. All this kind of stuff that, permeates across social media. And before we get out of here, the one thing I will say is Major League Baseball games have started to be played in spring training. The Cubs and Dodgers play today. Your Pittsburgh Pirates play on Saturday. But I'm going to leave you with this, is that I see this diagram, this chart, and I don't know who puts it out every year, and I wish I could give them credit for it, but I looked it up. I had taken like a screenshot on my phone, and I couldn't find out who it was. If your favorite player performs poorly in spring training, it means nothing. If your favorite player hits the crap out of the ball or pitches really well, it means a lot. If your least favorite player performs poorly, it means something. And if your least favorite player performs well, it means nothing. And obviously that is sarcasm because, yeah, guys are working on stuff. There's going to be, pitches thrown. I believe that Mitch Keller last year in one of his spring training starts threw 12 straight cutters to try to get that pitch going and was, the catcher was saying, no, throw it here. So these guys are working on stuff. The spring training stats and Kevin Newman's 600 plus, batting average doesn't mean a whole lot. Just enjoy the fact that baseball is back and the real games start in Miami pretty soon, but these are games to enjoy, and especially at the end of games to see younger players get in with their names not even on the back of their jerseys and random numbers, and just to kind of see some of these matchups and to see the guys come through spring training healthy.